The history of the Mandalorian people is steeped in legends, but that doesn't mean the information isn't the true story. The earliest days of what would become the Mandalorians found a race known as the Taung. These gray-skinned humanoid species lived on Coruscant in ancient days. They were such an influential part of the planet's and universe's history that the third day on the Galactic Standard Calendar is Taung's Day, named after them. The Taung were among the earliest peoples to live on Coruscant, but they weren't the only ones. The Zhell, a human civilization, were actually the dominant force on the planet. The Taung were a warrior race and wanted to take control of Coruscant for themselves. This war is known as the Taung versus the battalions of Zhell. It happened sometime before 7000 BBY. During one of the battles, a massive volcano on Coruscant erupted. It blanketed the entire planet in ash for decades. Quick side note, this massive volcano is not the highest peak, which is the only part of the planet uncovered by city as seen in The Mandalorian. That mountain is called Umate and is part of the Minari Range. The Taung saw this ash covering as an omen and christened themselves Dha Werda Verda, which translates to Warriors of the Shadow. The language they spoke was called Notran Cant. This was a dialect widely used by humanoid species that predated Galactic Basic, what we hear as English. This phrase would stay with the Taungs as they evolved into the Mandalorian culture and was even heard in the days of the Clone Wars in Republic Commando stories. Despite their resilience, resolve, and warrior ways, the Zhell would win the war and drive the remaining Taung from Coruscant. Legends differ slightly in the Zhell's ultimate fate. Some stories say they were wiped out, and others say they were assimilated into the larger human population that grew and spread all over the planet. I would guess there's a bit of truth to both versions. The leader of the Taungs during this conflict was a man called Mandalore, and eventually Mandalore the First. After some time wandering the galaxy, they found a suitable planet in the Outer Rim territories and named it Mandalore, after this great leader. They abandoned the identity of Taung and started going as Mandalorians. They worked hard to reforge their culture to be an even more formidable warrior race. It did not take them long before conquest, expansion, and honor were their core ideals. The earliest Mandalorians were the species Taung, but after their restructuring, they allowed other species to join, as Mandalorian was no longer a species, race, or ethnicity. As I said, these earliest histories are considered legends. The information inside still provides a strong foundation for future stories about the Mandalorians. Think of it in the same way as the earliest days of the establishment of Rome. Very little is actually known, but myth, legends, and history all meld to tell the story that establishes one of the most influential cultures in Earth history. If you're getting value or entertainment out of any of my transmissions, it would mean a lot if you would join the Remnant and subscribe. The Taungs are not referenced in canon as the early Mandalorians, but Mandalore is, and Taung's Day, the namesake of the species, is as well. In establishing their culture, the Mandalorians developed unique armor. They were allowed to individualize this armor, not just for personal expression, but to suit their preferred combat style and weapons. One of the biggest conquests of their history, something believed to be a legend even by their very people, was in domesticating the massive and ferocious mythosaur native to their adoptive homeworld of Mandalore. Hundreds of years in galactic history saw the Mandalorians grow their ranks, refine their culture of war, and expand a settled planet into a conquered and settled system. They took nearby worlds of Ordo, Gargon, and Shogun, either killing the people or folding them into the Mandalorians. They didn't just conquer lesser civilizations either. They valued strength and would fold in other warrior cultures to strengthen their own. 3,000 years of flourishing in the Outer Rim saw a small tribe of Taungs expelled into the galaxy turn into a multi-species warrior race composed of different clans or houses. Many stayed on Mandalore and the surrounding planets, while others chose a nomadic life, traveling the galaxy and taking what they wanted. Though they thrived through war and expansion, their strict code of ethics and honor separated them from a common terrorist or pirate band. To draw another connection to Earth's Rome, after Julius Caesar, the first dictator for life, the name Caesar became a title. After Mandalore was known as Mandalore I, the name Mandalore became a title that was bestowed to the clan leaders and fierce warriors. It translates into basic as the ultimate leader. I'll say it again, this is all Legends material without canon replacements. In my mind, it's as good as canon. There are some aspects of the Legends that have been established as canon, which only reinforces my thought that this is as good as the official history. Mandalorians are a multi-species race. They do hail from the planet Mandalore. They do have a history of conquering other cultures and battling with the Jedi Order. There was even a great warrior called Mandalore the Great that led a series of battles against the Jedi. It was these wars that took the Mandalorian armor and elevated it drastically to the near-invincible weapon-filled war suits that we would come to know through famous Mandalorians such as Bo-Katan Kryze, Din Djarin, and of course, Boba Fett. The armor and attached weapons were made to specifically counter common Jedi abilities, as expertly demonstrated by Sabine Wren. History, starting now with the Mandalorians, not the Taung specifically, can be defined by the current war or military conflict. This makes sense for a warrior culture. Going back to Legends, we can find a lot of information about the Mandalorian Wars in the Old Republic era. I wasn't able to track down much more than what was already covered in their earliest days of establishing their new culture and expanding their territory. In 3996 BBY, during the Great Sith War, Mandalore, the Indomitable, allied his Mandalorian Crusaders with Sith Lords Exar Kun and Ulic Kel Droma. The Mandalorian warriors rode on basilisk war droids, custom-made mechanical war mounts, against the Republic and the Jedi sworn to protect it. The major battles of this wider conflict that the Mandalorians participated in were in the Empress Teta system to hurt the Republic, Ossus to hurt the Jedi, and Coruscant to hurt the entire galaxy. The Mandalorians were on the losing side in that conflict. It hurt their pride and their numbers, but they were not a culture that would ever concede to a full defeat. A new leader rose in the aftermath, Mandalore the Ultimate. Ultimate rebuilt the clans, recruited more warriors from across the galaxy to bolster the Mandalorian numbers, and waged an entirely new war. This time, the fierce Mandalorians were not pawns of the Sith-centric conflict, but waged their own wars, calling all the shots, in what would become known as the Mandalorian Wars. This larger conflict spanned from 3976 to 3960 BBY. Ultimate's troops were called the Neo-Crusaders. They pushed hard for expansion. It seems clear by now that every time the Mandalorians lost a major conflict, they would come back more determined than ever to reforge their society so past mistakes would never be repeated. This war was a major success for the Mandalorians. The expansion their society saw was only rivaled by the Galactic Sith Empire that made their own push years before. In some ways, the Mandalorians' expansion was even more impressive than that of the Sith Empire. As the Sith Empire expanded in the unknown regions and their far less technologically advanced planets with less population density. The Mandalorians also had no mystical powers to call on, just true warrior grit and training. Cassus Fett, a fierce Mandalorian field marshal under Mandalore the Ultimate, was a great warrior, leader, and influenced much of the Mandalorian culture during his life. He was the one who pushed for the formation of the Neo-Crusaders in the first place. He streamlined the armoring process by making a more standardized armor, which also helped with a more standardized training. He also systematized folding conquered people into the Mandalorian and Neo-Crusaders to constantly grow their numbers. Fett took a group of formidable warriors and transformed them into a powerful army. Cassus engaged planets along the perimeter of Republic space to test things like their response time and strength. One particularly brutal battle was the invasion of Cathar. Cathar was a planet in the Quelli sector of the Outer Rim. Not even part of the Republic. It was a relatively small planet without special technology or resources of note. The native population lived in massive city trees. They were a humanoid species that were a bit smaller than that of a standard human. Cassus didn't just invade. He committed genocide. He drove the Cathar people to the brink of extinction before the Republic arrived to help. The only way the species survived was in fleeing their home planet. After testing the Republic, he made a full-on invasion of Republic space. Cassus assisted in many battles and sieges across the Republic. He even invaded Alderaan. Because of his effectiveness in combat, as well as his disregard for life, had him become the most wanted man in the galaxy. He was thought dead by the time of the Jedi Civil War, but his name would resurface years later with the infamous Jango and then Boba Fett. As the Mandalorian Wars progressed, the Republic was near their breaking point. The Jedi Knight Revan, before his fall to the dark side, led a faction of Jedi against the Neo-Crusaders and finally won a decisive victory against the Mandalorians to turn the tide of the larger battle. Revan challenged Ultimate to single combat on Malachor V. Revan won, but broke some Jedi ideals by using a super weapon called the Mass Shadow Generator. Not only did he plan and approve of the use of the weapon, but he designed it along with the Zabrak engineer Bao-Dur. The weapon would create a vortex powerful enough to destroy a planet. The weapon worked too well. It destroyed the Mandalorian fleet, but also most of the Republic fleet. The planet's surface was decimated, and most of the troops left behind from the battle were also killed. It ended the war, but the cost was far too great. The Republic was so badly affected by the war that it fell into a period of depression. This latest defeat of the Mandalorians had them reinvent their culture once again. They scattered. Many became bounty hunters or soldiers for hire. They held their heads high and looked for ways to regain their honor. Canderous Ordo, who was once conquered by the Mandalorians, recovered Ultimate's mask and wore it under the name Mandalore the Preserver. He worked hard to rebuild the various clans and re-establish the Mandalorians as a galactic power. In roughly 1050 BBY, the first Mandalorian was inducted into the Jedi Order. Tar Vizsla was a Force-sensitive Mandalorian. He created a unique form of lightsaber, known as the Darksaber, inside the Jedi Temple. This had an unconventional design and hilt that produced a very unconventional black blade with a crackling white energy field around it. After Vizsla's death, the Darksaber was stored within the Jedi Temple. Future conflicts between Mandalorian and Jedi saw proud members of Clan Vizsla break into the temple and steal the unique weapon. They saw this as a Mandalorian weapon, not a Jedi one. It took on a mythology all its own and held a lot of power in Mandalorian culture. Whoever wielded the weapon was accepted as the ruler of Mandalore. The weapon passed down for generations, sometimes given, oftentimes won in combat. This strengthened the myth that the weapon threw Mandalorians' belief in strength and honor.